Hi guys, I hope you're well. I wanted to go over a quick live stream here. I know it's late, but I thought maybe someone's maybe on the West Coast or some people on the East Coast or maybe up super late and just hanging out on YouTube, and I wasn't able to do a video tonight. Next week we'll get back into the swing of things once I get my audio figured out with the whiteboards. But anyway, this reverse repo thing is just kind of all the talk, and it's just really frustrating me because it's just what the mainstream media is telling you is utter nonsense. I mean, it doesn't. Yeah, the lack of intellectual curiosity in the mainstream media is staggering. It really it has no limits. They're stupid. I don't want to use the word stupidity, but it's really it's really the bottom line. It's their stupidity and lack of intellectual curiosity has absolutely no limit whatsoever. And man, and what really irritates me is they perpetuate this narrative that most of the time, or a lot of the time, is just totally false, and people just repeat it so many times, and then the average Joe and Jane, because they hear it so many times, they just assume that it's true. And it really irritates me. So let me show you what I'm talking about here. You guys have heard the whole narrative that banks are just flushed with cash, and they have all this extra cash because the Fed's doing quantitative easing, and the Fed needs to soak up all the liquidity. And in order for the Fed to soak up the liquidity, they're setting up they're doing the reverse repos, or the banks are choosing to do the reverse repos with the Fed, and to get the 5 basis points. Remember, the Fed raised the reverse repo rate from 0 up to 5 basis points, and this is supposedly what is prompting all of the banks to put their quote unquote cash with the Fed. It's just a total blatant misunderstanding of how the entire system works. So let's do the screen share. Let's see, where do we start? Well, you guys know the narrative right here. This is this Reuters article, or Reuters, excuse me, talking about the reverse, the record demand for Federal Reserve program that lets money market funds and other firms part cash with the Federal Reserve overnight is not concerning. Okay. New York Fed President John Williams. Now let me give credit where credit is due. They are talking about money market funds, and that is different from the banks and the primary dealer banks under the Fed's umbrella, because they do not have accounts with the Fed. Therefore, they do not qualify for IOER, which is interest on excess reserves, and that does make a difference. It absolutely does. But it's not to say that 100% of the repos are being done by money market funds and other entities that don't have accounts with the Fed. Said another way, that have their cash as a liability of the commercial banking system, as opposed to a liability of the Federal Reserve. And this will make more sense in a moment. And they point out right here, and I'll highlight it, what I was saying is that they raised the rate that they're paying on reverse repos, they meaning the Fed, from 0 to 5 basis points. Okay, everyone got it on the same page? Okay, now what are they paying on IOER? That really should be the next question. So and by the way, if you haven't seen a chart of how just parabolic these reverse repos are going. Here it is right here. It is really mind-boggling. Up to over 700 billion, almost actually, excuse me, yes, almost $800 billion per day. But let's look at the interest rate on IOER, or the interest on excess reserves. IOER is what they call it here. Okay, now if you can't see it, we're right along here at 10 basis points, but now they just bumped it up to 15 basis points. So I know that I am by no means a math genius or expert, and I don't even know what the highest level of math I took. Probably, I don't know. I think I probably flunked out of trigonometry or something or geometry. I don't know. It was one of those ometries that I probably flunked out of in high school. But one thing I do know is that 15 basis points is higher than 5 basis points. Oh, yes. That we know is true. I always say there are no probabilities, or excuse me, there are no certainties. There are only probabilities. But this is one time where there is a certainty. 15 basis points is higher than 5 basis points. Okay, now let's check out this diagram. And this, oh, don't worry. When you see this, you're probably, your head is going to explode. But don't worry, I'm going to walk you through it. So let me see if we can zoom in. Just to make sure you guys can see and read everything here. Okay. This is a diagram of how the dollar funding markets work. It's actually very helpful. It's at the newyorkfed.org, so I'm not pulling this off some random blog or something like that. This is straight from the Fed themselves. And you can see we've got the Federal Reserve's balance sheet. So it lists what their assets are, usually their liabilities. And then we've got the US dollar funding market. So we've got onshore entities, and then we have offshore entities. I want to point out the top thing, or the top liability, as you would probably guess, are bank reserves, reserve balances from depository institutions. In other words, what I always say in my videos, they're the bank reserves from the primary dealer banks and the banks under the Fed's umbrella. Why do I say under the Fed's umbrella? I say that because that means that they have their checking deposit or their deposit accounts with the Fed. Their liabilities, their cash, quote unquote, or their dollars are a liability of the Federal Reserve. Your dollars, your cash that you have in your account is a deposit, or excuse me, it's a deposit, therefore a liability of the commercial banking system. Because until we get Fed coin, you're not going to have an account with the Fed. It's just these banks and primary dealer banks that you see right here in this square. So this red arrow indicates that they have reserve accounts. So the Fed is paying IOER, interest on excess reserves, to whatever quote unquote cash is being held in this account, which is a liability. That account is paying what? We just looked at it right here. It's paying 15 basis points. Okay. Well, let's scroll down a little, and we see that under the category of onshore entities, we not only have banks and primary dealer banks that actually have accounts with the Fed, and therefore their cash is a liability of the Fed, but we have onshore investors. Now, the onshore investors do not have accounts with the Fed. So their cash is a liability of the commercial banking system. Notice that every single dollar, whether it's yours, whether it's JP Morgan's, Goldman Sachs, the McDonald's down the street, your hairdresser, every single dollar that they have in their account is what? It's simply a liability of a bank. The only question is that, is it a liability of the commercial banking system, or is it a liability of the Fed? Every dollar, other than the green pieces of paper, is a liability of a bank. You got it. And I say that over and over and over and over again, because that is so hard for people to get through their head. They think that dollars are just, they see them as green pieces of paper, and it's strictly green pieces of paper, something that's tangible, and therefore you give your dollars to the bank, and then they somehow store it in the back for safekeeping or something like that. But they if you give green pieces of paper to the bank, let's say you gave them your money just because you're feeling charitable, that somehow their assets would go up. And that's not what happens. Their assets don't go up if you give them dollars. It's their liabilities go down, because that's all dollars are liabilities of a bank. They're just IOUs, and the dollars themselves are IOUs. So they're just saying IOU, IOUs. Okay, now that we've got that out of the way, the onshore investors come here, and they, which is indicated by not only the onshore investors, but the banks and the dealers. You can see that here, as indicated by these blue lines. You see that? If we go over here, we see the blue line indicates reverse repurchase agreements. In other words, reverse repos. This is the liability account for the Fed for these reverse repo transactions. So let's think this through. You notice that with this box that indicates the banks and the primary dealers, there's a red arrow indicating that they can get paid IOER because they have an account with the Fed, and there is a blue arrow indicating that if they so choose, they could do a reverse repo with the Fed. What would be the difference? Well, the reverse repo, they would take their quote unquote cash, it would move from this account, and it would go down to this account. Therefore, the Fed would technically be taking it out of the control of the banks themselves. This is how they would quote unquote pay the Fed. And then what would the Fed do? The Fed would give them a treasury or pristine collateral as collateral to back up the cash that they kind of gave the Fed, but really didn't give the Fed, because all the Fed did is moved it from their reserve account down to the reverse repurchase agreement account. But they took it out of the control, let's say, it meaning the bank reserves of these primary dealer banks and banks under the Fed's umbrella. Okay, we got it. Everyone's on the same page. But think about this. Up in this account, they're getting paid 15 basis points for the cash. Down in this account, they're being paid 5 basis points. So what the mainstream media is trying to tell us is that the banks have so much cash, it's just overflowing, and they just don't have anywhere to put it. So they're just gonna park cash with the Fed, even though the cash is already with the Fed. Somehow they're gonna repark it, I guess. But what they end up doing is they park the cash in this account instead of this account. Why would a bank do that? Why would they park their cash in an account that only pays 5 basis points when it's already in an account that pays 15. It makes no sense whatsoever. The obvious answer is because they get something that they are willing to pay 10 basis points for, if not more. And that is the treasury that they're getting from the Fed. If you just think things through beyond the level of a third grader, it becomes blatantly obvious. But unfortunately, the mainstream media that we have only wants to do one thing. Excuse me, two things. Tell you to buy Bitcoin, and then hear some guy shouting and hitting bells and whistles, just saying buy, 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 buy. That's the intellectual height of the mainstream media's capacity, intellectual capacity. So don't be fooled by the nonsense. Now, I also want to point out something that nobody is talking about at all. And that's what these onshore investors are doing that do not have accounts with the Fed. So they don't have the opportunity to get the 15 basis points unless the bank where their cash is, the commercial bank, is paying them 15 basis points. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. I don't know. I'm sure each one of these entities, retail investors, government money market funds, prime money market funds, corporates, hedge funds, etc. I'm sure that they have different interest rates that they're being paid by their commercial bank to hold funds there, dollars, or bank liabilities. But what happens when they park their cash with the Fed? Again, all that's happening is their account with their commercial bank is being decreased by X amount of dollars, and they're just taking the reserves, the Fed, from their banking institution and moving it down to the reverse repurchase agreement account. Again, there's no parking of cash because the cash or the bank reserves were already parked at the Fed. It's just they are parked in a different account. Now, these money market funds, they need some place to put this money and get some sort of return above and beyond what you would get in a checking account. So, but their game usually isn't rehypothecation and creating derivatives and financial engineering like the hedge funds or the big banks, right? I don't think they're into the engineering game to the same extent. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think they are. So you've got a lot of these funds that are putting cash, and I hate to use that term, but putting cash into this account, okay, to get the 5 basis points. Well, a lot of people are saying that they're doing that to get the collateral. And I get it, just like we talked about the banks and the dealers doing that. But see, these banks and dealers are far more into financial engineering where they, in my opinion, can most likely make a significantly higher return than the 10 basis points they're paying to move the reserves from the reserve account down to the reverse repurchase agreement account. But if the prime money markets funds aren't really doing that financial engineering, what does this tell us? Right? Why would one of these funds choose to put their let me say it the correct way here. Why would these money market funds choose the Fed as a counterparty for their cash instead of the commercial banking system? Why would they choose the Fed as a counterparty instead of maybe taking those funds and putting them to work in the repo market? Well, because maybe they know that since there is a shortage of pristine collateral, maybe the entities that are trying to borrow the money from the money market funds in the first place have significantly more counterparty risk than they had 3 or 4 months ago. Why? Maybe that's because of all these loans they're thinking all these loans are going to go bad because the government's not giving out stimmy checks currently, or maybe they're not going to extend the foreclosure moratorium, or maybe they're not going to extend one of these other programs that could lead to massive amounts of defaults. So if you're a money market fund, you're like, okay, I could lend into repo, but the entity that I would normally lend to, they don't have any T-bills. All they have are mortgage-backed securities. Now, normally I would lend to them, but since the counterparty risk has increased, I'm not going to lend to them unless they have T-bills. And maybe it's not exclusively the fact that we have a shortage of pristine collateral because we have a shortage of pristine collateral. Maybe it's also a result of us not having enough pristine collateral to match up with the increase in counterparty risk. Because if you have a decrease in counterparty risk, then most likely these money market funds would be willing to accept less pristine collateral, right? You got to think about it this way. If you've got a buddy that's a multi-millionaire and he's trustworthy, and he, for whatever reason, his ATM card's not working or whatever, so he needs to borrow $1,000. You'd probably just give him that loan, no problem, because he's good for it. You wouldn't even need collateral. But if it was one of your buddies, maybe who was kind of flaky and really didn't keep their word, now all of a sudden you're like, okay, yeah, I'll give you $1,000, but dude, you got to give me like your laptop or something. I need some collateral. You see, so it's not just I don't think we should just be looking at it from a standpoint of a shortage of collateral. I think we should be looking at it potentially, I'm not saying this is happening, but potentially that from a standpoint of the increased counterparty risk for the borrowers increasing to a degree where the collateral that was sufficient 3 or 4 months ago is no longer sufficient. Therefore, these money market funds are saying, you know what, screw it. We can't find anywhere to put our money, so we'll just go ahead and give it to the Fed, because we know there's no counterparty risk. In addition to that, we're getting T-bills from the Fed, which is pristine collateral. So I'm not saying that's what's going on. Now, as far as what we first discussed with the banks opting to get 5 basis points over 15 as a result of wanting the collateral, I think that's obvious. But let's compartmentalize what I'm saying here. The second part of what I'm saying is that I think these other entities where you see these other blue lines going into reverse repo, sure, it could be a shortage of collateral, but on the other side of the coin, I think it could also be an increase in the counterparty risk for those entities who are wanting to borrow from the money market funds in the first place. And that's something no one is talking about. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and eat dinner. Hopefully that made sense. And I'm going to try to do a whiteboard video tomorrow. It might not be with the whiteboard. It might be like I did when I was in Medellin, where I'm just talking over it, because I'd have to use this for audio, because this, as you guys know, this audio thing that I tried to use last Tuesday just absolutely sucked. So I can't do that again. All right, guys. Let's do some shout outs here. Who do we have on the live stream? We got Jason Kincaid. We got Nicholas. We got Matt Stevenson, James P. Brayton, Moody the Millennial in the house, Marie Casillas, Born Like Stars, Graham, HSU. Who else we have? James P. Did I say James P? If not, James P. Aaron Steffensmeyer. Aaron Steffensmeyer. Average Jane, Angel Pineru, Alex Z, Cobra Engineering, David Serrano, Rally Repairs, Corbin Taylor, Andy Dean, Duez Education, Low End, Angelique is in the house, Cal, El Chamillo, it just skipped on me, Folsom Flash, Echoing Owl. Cool. We got some new, some different folks on tonight's live stream. I guess when I do it at different times, some different individuals tune in. So it's good to see all you people tuning in that usually aren't regulars. You probably watch the live streams after the fact, but you're not able to actually participate when I'm doing them live. So, all right, guys, enjoy the rest of your evening. We'll see you on the next video.